The night my husband raised his hand to me over a plate of rice. I finally understood something I had spent 9 years refusing to see. Some men do not want a wife. They want a servant who calls them honey. My name is Amara Whitfield, and this is the night everything I built out of silence finally broke. I want to start by telling you I am not a woman who believes in exaggerating pain for sympathy. I worked 12 years as a labor and delivery nurse. I have held the hands of women in the worst moments of their lives. And I know the difference between a bad day and a life you need to leave. What happened to me in my own kitchen, in front of my own children, was not a bad day. It was the last stone in a wall that had been built one small brick at a time for almost a decade, and I did not see the whole shape of that wall until the night it finally came down on my face. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because you cannot understand why a slap over rice broke a marriage unless you understand everything that rice was standing on top of. I met Derek Whitfield when I was 23 years old, in my second year of nursing school in Columbus, Ohio. He was 26, already working construction with his uncle's company, already talking about starting his own crew one day. He had this way of looking at you like you were the only person in a crowded room. Like whatever you were saying mattered more than anything else happening around you. My mother used to say that Derek had good bones, meaning he came from people who worked hard and went to church on Sunday and didn't run around. She liked that his mother, Constance, kept a spotless house and a full pantry. The kind of woman who canned her own tomatoes every August like it was still 1965. I want to be honest with you. In the beginning, Derek was not cruel. He was attentive in a way that felt like love, but that I would later understand was actually the early architecture of control. He wanted to know where I was. He wanted to know who I was texting. He wanted to drive me to my night shifts and pick me up, which felt romantic when I was 23 and exhausting when I was 31 with 2 children and a full-time job of my own. We married when I was 26. Naomi was born 2 years later, and Julian came 3 years after that. By the time this story really begins, I was 34 years old, Naomi was 9, Julian was 6, and I had spent almost a decade slowly shrinking myself to fit into a shape that made Derek comfortable. Here is something I need you to understand about how control works in a marriage. It rarely announces itself. It does not walk through the front door wearing a sign. It comes in wearing the clothes of care. It comes in saying, I just don't want anyone disrespecting you, and I just think a wife should serve her husband first. That's how I was raised, and why are you getting defensive? I'm not trying to control you. I just have expectations. Derek's mother, Constance, had raised 3 sons and one rule that she repeated at every holiday dinner like scripture. The man of the house eats first. She said it laughing, like it was a quaint old-fashioned joke. But I watched her enforce it at every single Thanksgiving and Christmas for 9 years. She would fix her sons' plates before her own, before her daughters-in-law, before the grandchildren who were hungry and tired from a long car ride. And Derek absorbed that rule into his blood like it was oxygen. For the first few years of our marriage, I followed it without even questioning it, because I told myself it was a small thing, a tradition, a way of honoring the man who worked hard to provide. I would fix Derek's plate first, then the kids, then myself, usually eating cold food standing at the counter while everyone else was already halfway through dinner. I told myself this was what a good wife did. I told myself this was love in the shape my mother-in-law had taught me to recognize. But here is the thing about small rules. They are never actually small. They are training. Every time I put his plate before mine, I was training myself to believe my needs came last. And every time he watched me do it without objection, he was training himself to believe that was simply the natural order of our home. The warning signs did not start with violence. They started with erosion. When Naomi was 2 years old, I wanted to go back to school for my nurse practitioner license. Derek said we couldn't afford the tuition right now, even though I found out later that same year he had put a down payment on a used pickup truck without telling me. When I brought it up, he said, "A man needs a reliable truck for work, Amara. That's different. That's providing for the family." My education, apparently, was not providing for the family. It was an indulgence. When Julian was born, I went back to work after 8 weeks because we needed the income, and Derek's construction business had a slow winter. I remember standing in the nursery at 4 in the morning, pumping milk before a 12-hour shift, and Derek walking past the door and saying, "Could you keep it down? I've got an early start." I did not ask him to help. I had already learned by then that asking led to arguments, and arguments led to him going quiet for days. A cold silence that filled the house like smoke, and I had learned that his silence frightened me more than his workload frightened me. That is the part one think a lot of people do not understand from the outside. It is easy to say, "Why didn't you just speak up? Why didn't you just leave sooner?" But when someone can make an entire house feel like it is holding its breath just by refusing to speak to you for 3 days, you learn very quickly which battles are worth that silence and which are not. I chose my battles down to almost nothing. I became an expert in accommodation. I became fluent in a language where my own hunger, my own exhaustion, my own name came second to keeping the peace. There was a night when Naomi was about 6 that I think about often now. She had made a chore chart at school, one of those simple worksheets where kids draw pictures of who does what in the family. Under "Who eats first at dinner?" she drew a picture of her father with a fork, sitting alone at the head of the table, and then underneath him, smaller, she drew me and her and Julian in a row. Her teacher had sent it home in a folder of family observations as part of a unit on community roles. I remember sitting in my car in the school parking lot and crying, not because it was dramatic, but because my 6-year-old daughter had drawn our family exactly as it was, without me ever having said a single word to her about it. She had simply watched the way children always watch. And she had learned the shape of our home from what she saw at the dinner table every single night. I did not leave that day. I told myself I would find a way to talk to Derek about it gently, to explain that I wanted our children to see something different. When I finally brought it up that weekend, sitting on the porch after the kids were in bed, I chose my words as carefully as I have ever chosen anything in my life. "I think we should serve dinner differently," I said. "I want the kids to see us both getting our plates around the same time. Not always you first." Derek set down his glass of tea very slowly. "This is about your feminist coworkers again, isn't it?" "It's about Naomi's homework," I said. "She drew you eating alone at the head of the table and the rest of us in a line behind you. That's what she sees, Derek." He was quiet for a long moment, and I actually let myself hope. "My mother served my father first every single night of her life," he finally said. "She served me first every single night I lived in that house." That's not oppression, Amara. That's respect. If you can't show me basic respect in my own home, that says a lot more about you than it does about me. I remember the exact feeling of that sentence landing in my chest, the way an argument can be turned completely inside out so that the person hurt becomes the accused. I did not have the language for it then. I have it now. It is called reversal, and it is one of the oldest tools in the toolbox of a man who does not want to change. I let it go. I always let it go, and the years kept moving. By the time Naomi was 9 and Julian was 6, the pattern was no longer a pattern I questioned. It was simply the architecture of our home. I worked full-time. I did the school pickups on the days I wasn't on shift, using a rotation with my sister Yvonne and my friend Renee, who was also a nurse at my hospital. I cooked almost every meal, even after 12-hour shifts, because Derek said his construction work was real physical labor in a way that suggested standing for 12 hours doing chest compressions and helping deliver babies was somehow leisure. I served him first every night, then the kids, then myself. And most nights I ate standing at the counter, half listening to whether anyone needed a refill, my own plate going cold while everyone else's steam rose. I want to pause here and tell you something important, which is that I am not telling you this story so you feel sorry for me. I am telling you because I think a lot of women watching this are living inside a version of this exact pattern right now. And they have gotten so used to the shape of it that they no longer recognize it as something that could be different. The warning signs escalated slowly enough that I could always explain each one away individually. There was the time he threw my phone across the room because I texted my sister during dinner. And I told myself, he was just stressed about a client who hadn't paid him. There was the time he told me my scrubs made me look like I stopped caring how I looked in front of his mother at a family barbecue. And I told myself, he's just insecure. He doesn't mean it the way it sounds. There was the time, about 8 months before the night I am about to tell you about, when he grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave a mark because I had made plans to have dinner with Renee without asking him first. And I told myself, he's never actually hit me. A bruise from grabbing isn't the same thing. That is the sentence that haunts me now. A bruise from grabbing isn't the same thing. I had built an entire internal legal system to distinguish between what counted as abuse and what didn't. And every single line I drew a little further out. To protect the marriage, to protect the family, to protect the story I had told myself about who Derek was and who I had chosen to build a life with. The revelation that changed everything did not come from Derek directly. It came from his phone. About 6 weeks before the slap, I was doing laundry and found Derek's work phone in the pocket of his jeans. The phone he used for his contracting business, separate from his personal phone. It buzzed with a text while I was folding towels, and I glanced at the screen out of habit more than suspicion. It was from a contact saved as Tasha Estimates. I do not want to romanticize what I did next, because I know some of you are expecting a dramatic scene of me reading through months of messages in a fit of rage. It was not like that. It was quiet and cold and almost clinical. I sat down on the edge of our bed, and I read every message going back for months. My hands completely steady in a way that frightened me more than shaking would have. Tasha was a kitchen designer Derek had been working with on a remodel job in the next town over. The messages started professional, quotes for cabinets, timelines for a client's kitchen. Somewhere around message 200, they stopped being professional. There were photographs. There were plans to meet at a motel off Route 40 on days he had told me he was working late on the Hendricks job. There was a message from 3 weeks before I found the phone that said, I keep thinking about what you said, that you feel more like yourself with me than you have in years. And Derek had responded, she doesn't even see me anymore. She's just going through the motions. You make me feel like a man again. I sat on that bed for a long time. I did not cry immediately. I think I was too busy doing math. I was counting the late nights, the extra jobs he had picked up over the summer, the way he had started working out again and buying new cologne. All the things I had noticed and quietly explained away because I did not want to be a suspicious wife. Because I had been taught by 9 years of marriage that questioning him led to punishment, not answers. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I did not confront him that night. I want to be honest about why. It was not because I was weak. It was because I was, for the first time in years, thinking strategically instead of emotionally. I had 2 children. I had a job that could support us, but not overnight, not without a plan. I had watched enough patients come through the emergency department over the years, women whose husbands had reacted violently the moment they felt cornered, to understand that a confrontation without a plan could be dangerous, not just painful. So I started quietly to prepare. I opened a savings account at a different bank, one Derek did not have access to, and I started moving small amounts of money into it every payday, amounts small enough that he would not notice them missing from our joint account. I called my sister Yvonne and told her only that I needed to talk. Not everything yet, just enough that she would know something was wrong. I started keeping a private folder of screenshots on a cloud account Derek did not know existed, documenting not just the affair but the pattern, dates of the grabbed wrist, the thrown phone, the comment about my scrubs, everything I had spent years minimizing, now laid out in black and white where I could not explain it away anymore. I also started paying closer attention at dinner. And this is where the 2 threads of my story, the affair and the ritual of who ate first, finally came together in a way I had never expected. I noticed that on the nights Derek had seen Tasha, he came home almost performatively affectionate, kissing my forehead, complimenting my cooking, and, on those same nights, the rule about eating first mattered to him even more than usual. It was as though performing dominance at the dinner table was his way of resetting the story in his own head, proving to himself that he was still the man of the house, still in control. Even while he was actively betraying the house he claimed to be head of. I do not think Derek consciously understood this connection. I do not think most men who behave this way consciously understand anything about themselves at all. But I understood it. Watching him from the stove with a clarity I had never had before. Because for 6 weeks I was no longer looking at my husband as a woman in love, trying to keep the peace. I was looking at him as a witness gathering evidence. The night everything broke was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday was Julian's soccer practice, and I had picked both kids up, made dinner. Chicken and rice and green beans, nothing special. And I was exhausted in the particular way that comes from working a double shift the day before and running on maybe 5 hours of sleep. Derek came home late, later than usual, smelling faintly of a cologne I now recognized as one I had never bought him. He sat down at the head of the table the way he always did, and I set his plate in front of him the way I always did, out of 9 years of muscle memory, more than choice. Then I turned to fix Naomi's plate and Julian's, and by the time I got to my own, I was so tired, so genuinely bone-tired, that I did something I had never done in 9 years of marriage. I served myself first. It was not a statement. I want to be very clear about that because in the weeks since, people have asked me if I did it on purpose, if I was testing him, if I knew what would happen. I did not. I was simply exhausted enough that instinct overrode 9 years of training. And my hand reached for my own plate before it reached for anyone else's. Derek noticed immediately. I watched his jaw shift the way it did right before he went quiet for days. Except this time, he did not go quiet. "Did you just serve yourself before the kids finished getting theirs?" he asked, his voice low in a way I had learned over years to be afraid of. "I served myself before I finished plating everyone's food." "Yes," I said. "I've been on my feet since 5 this morning." "Derek." "You've been on your feet," he repeated, standing up from his chair. "You think I haven't been on a job site since 6? You think that's not standing?" I want to pause the story here to tell you something. In 9 years, I had never once talked back in this moment. I had always apologized, always corrected myself, always smoothed it over before it could become anything. But 6 weeks of quietly building a case against him, 6 weeks of reading the ways he called another woman more like myself, while starving his own wife of even the basic dignity of eating a warm meal, had changed something in me. I did not apologize. "I'm tired too," I said. "I work just as hard as you do. And tonight I served myself first because I was hungry and exhausted and honestly, Derek, I don't think that should be a crime in my own house." The kids had gone quiet. Naomi, 9 years old, was watching us with the same careful, cataloging expression she'd had when she drew that chore chart 3 years earlier. Julian had put his fork down. "In my own house," Derek said, his voice rising, "there is an order to things. There has always been an order to things. My mother respected my father enough to serve him first every single day of her life. And you can't even manage that after a bad shift. Your mother also spent 40 years being told her needs came last," I said. "I'm not doing that anymore." And that is when he slapped me. I want to describe this as clearly and as honestly as I can, because I think it matters. It was not a slap in a movie, dramatic and slow motion. It was fast and sharp, and it happened before either of us, I think, fully understood what was happening. His hand connected with the left side of my face hard enough that I stumbled into the counter. Hard enough that Julian screamed, a raw, frightened sound I had never heard my son make before. Hard enough that Naomi immediately started crying and grabbed her brother's arm and pulled him back from the table. There was a silence after that slap that I do not have words for. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear Julian crying into Naomi's shoulder. My face was burning, and my ears were ringing slightly. And Derek was standing there with his hand still slightly raised, looking, for just a moment, almost as shocked as I was. And then something happened that I did not plan, that I had never once let myself imagine doing in 9 years of marriage. In 9 years of small accommodations and swallowed anger and dinner plates served in the correct order. I slapped him back. I am not going to pretend this was some empowering cinematic moment. My hand was shaking. My face hurt. My children were crying in the corner of our kitchen. But in that half second after my palm connected with his cheek, something in my chest that had been coiled tight for almost a decade finally released. And I heard myself say words that had been building in me since I first read those messages 6 weeks earlier. "You will never touch me again," I said. "Not tonight. Not ever again." Derek's face went through several expressions in quick succession: shock, then anger, then something that almost looked like fear. "Amara, I am so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I would never. You know I would never. It's just been a hard week. The Hendricks job fell through, and I've been so stressed." "I know about Tasha," I said. I watched the color drain out of his face. "I have known for 6 weeks," I continued, and my voice did not shake, which surprised me even as I spoke. "I have known about the motel on Route 40. I have known about every text where you told her I don't see you anymore, while you were coming home to me and our children every single night. And I have known for a lot longer than 6 weeks. That in this house, my needs come last, that my hunger comes last, that my education came last, that my rest comes last, and that apparently my safety comes last too. Because you just hit me in front of our children over a plate of rice." "Amara, Naomi, Julian, go get your shoes," I said, not taking my eyes off Derek. "We're going to Annie Vaughn's. I want to tell you that Derek tried to stop us. That there was some final dramatic confrontation at the door. There wasn't. I think the combination of the affair being exposed and the shock of me hitting him back, of me speaking to him in a voice he had never heard from me before, seemed to genuinely paralyze him. He stood in the kitchen, one hand still pressed to his own cheek, and said my name 2 or 3 more times as I helped Julian into his shoes with hands that were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up to me. I drove to Yvonne's with my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, Naomi in the front seat because Julian was crying too hard to sit anywhere but next to his sister in the back, his small hand held tightly in hers. Yvonne opened the door, before I even knocked, because I had texted her from a red light 2 miles from her house. One sentence. "He hit me. I'm coming with the kids." I am not going to walk you through every single detail of the weeks that followed, because I want to focus on what matters, but I will tell you the shape of it. I filed a police report that same night, with a photograph of the mark on my face taken by Yvonne's phone under her kitchen light. I contacted a domestic violence advocate through the hospital's employee resource program the next morning, someone who helped me understand my legal options with a clarity I had never had access to on my own. I filed for a protective order within the week, using the documentation I had quietly gathered over 6 weeks, the screenshots, the dates, the pattern that had once felt like nothing and now, laid out in a legal filing, looked exactly like what it was. Derek's mother, Constance, called me 3 times in the first week. I only answered once. She told me that marriages have hard seasons, that Derek had always had a temper, but he loved his family, that I was overreacting to one slap after 9 good years. I told her, as gently as I could manage, that I did not think there had been 9 good years. I thought there had been 9 years of me disappearing a little more each year to keep a peace that was never actually peaceful, and that the slap was not the beginning of something. It was simply the moment the something finally became visible. I want to tell you about the consequences, because I think this is the part people are most curious about. And I think it's the part that matters most for anyone watching this who is living inside a similar pattern right now. Derek lost more than he expected to lose when I filed for divorce, citing both the physical incident and a documented pattern of controlling behavior, along with evidence of the affair. His lawyer initially pushed for a 50-50 custody arrangement, but the police report, the protective order, and Naomi's own statement to a court-appointed counselor, in which my 9-year-old daughter described, in her own careful 9-year-old words, watching her father hit her mother over dinner, changed the trajectory of that negotiation. Derek ended up with supervised visitation for the first several months, moving to standard visitation only after completing a court-mandated anger management and domestic violence intervention program. His contracting business struggled that year too, partly because his focus was elsewhere. And partly, I think, because word travels in small towns. And Tasha's own marriage had also ended once her husband found the messages, and neither of them came out of that unscathed either. I moved into a small rental house 8 minutes from the hospital with Naomi and Julian. I am not going to pretend those first months were easy. Julian had nightmares for a while. Naomi asked me once, very quietly, while I was tucking her in, whether it was her fault, because she had drawn that picture in 2nd grade and never told me how she felt about it. I held her for a long time that night and told her the truth, that nothing that happened in our house was ever her fault, that children see things and draw them honestly, and that her drawing had actually been a gift, because it had shown me something I had been too afraid to see clearly on my own. I want to tell you where things stand now. About a year and a half after that night in the kitchen, I finished the nurse practitioner program I had once been told we couldn't afford, using a combination of loans and the money I had quietly saved in that separate account. I work now in a role with better hours and significantly better pay. And for the first time in my adult life, I make my own plate first, not out of spite, but because I finally understand that a person who cannot feed herself cannot properly feed anyone else either. Naomi is 11 now, and she still draws, though her drawings look different these days. Julian, who is 8, still occasionally flinches at raised voices, something a child therapist tells me may fade slowly over time with patience and consistency. And I have both. Derek and I speak now only about logistics, custody exchanges, school events, the practical architecture of co-parenting 2 children we both, in our own damaged ways, love. He has apologized to me more than once, and I believe some of those apologies were sincere. But I have learned something that I think is the actual lesson of the story. More than the slap, more than the affair, more than any single dramatic moment. Sincerity in an apology does not undo a pattern. A man can be sorry and still be the kind of man who believes his comfort matters more than his family's safety. Those 2 things can live in the same person at the same time. And it is not a woman's job to hold both of them until one of them finally kills something in her, whether that something is her body or simply her sense of self. If there is one thing I want you to take from this story, it is this. Watch the small rules in your own home, the ones that feel too minor to fight about, the ones that get explained away as tradition or temperament or just the way he was raised. Ask yourself whose comfort those rules actually protect and whose needs they quietly erase. A marriage where one person always eats first and one person always eats last, literally or in every other sense of the word, is not a marriage built on love. It is a marriage built on a hierarchy, and hierarchies, when they are threatened, do not usually stay peaceful. Mine didn't. I do not regret slapping Derek back that night, though I know some of you will have feelings about that. And I welcome them. I do not think it made me a hero. I think it was simply the moment 9 years of silence finally found a voice, even an imperfect, trembling one. What I am proud of is not the slap. What I am proud of is what came after it, the police report, the protective order, the quiet months of building a life that belonged to me and my children instead of shrinking to fit inside someone else's rules. If you are watching this and you recognize your own dinner table and mine, I want you to know that the exit does exist. Even when it feels impossible. Even when you have spent years convincing yourself that what you're living in is simply how marriage works. It is not too late to serve yourself first, at your own table, in your own life. So let me ask you this before you go. Have you ever noticed a small rule in your own home or your own relationship? Something that seemed too minor to question, that you later realized was actually protecting someone else's comfort at the cost of your own? I would love to hear about it in the comments below.